Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I want to talk a little bit about the pretty serious and dire situation in which we find ourselves here in the UK, and how I think, without exaggeration, and I don't say this lightly, I think we could well be headed for complete economic collapse and quite possibly social collapse as well. Things are really serious, and I will explain why. We all know that there are huge challenges facing the world, the biggest of which is by far global warming. We all experience the 40 degrees temperatures in the UK. Just a few weeks ago, which are quite exceptional. We've all seen the freak weather events going on around the world over the last few years. We've seen the desperate situation in Pakistan, where there have been these massive floods affecting millions, tens of millions of people. Floods coming from melting ice in the Himalayas, ice which provides a lot of the drinking water for much of Pakistan and India. Really serious floods. We've seen how global warming has resulted in droughts which have affected food production. We've seen even in Europe this year huge problems with farmers and people growing crops and so on, being having huge problems because of the drought. And it always seems to me, and I can't quite understand this. It is so much more important than anything else, and yet it really always takes second place when some other crisis comes along, and it's something, well, we're going to try and do a bit about it. We're all doing a bit, and so on. Why this isn't the absolute fixation of every government in the world? Why it isn't the absolute priority to deal with it? But it doesn't seem to be. The second big problem which is facing the whole world is, of course, having a deranged madman in the Kremlin. A man who is, it seems, fairly determined to do as much damage to Western democracies as possible, despite the fact that he's destroying his own country as well at the same time. He's a guy who is very unpredictable, particularly now that he's not doing very well in Ukraine, and a guy who could do anything and is a huge threat to the world. And of course, as a result of I think now he turned off the Nord Stream 1 yesterday, didn't he? Well, as a result of that, of course, we're all facing these huge electricity and gas prices, which are having a profound effect on economies throughout the world, particularly in Europe and above all here in the UK. Incidentally, in the UK, according to something called the Household Energy Price Index, which is some sort of index run by an organisation in Austria, we have the highest domestic electricity prices in out of 33 countries throughout Europe, and our gas prices are pretty high too. So we're suffering as much, if not more, than most people. And whereas the EU have been working very hard to try and find ways of mitigating these huge increases, what's been happening in the UK for the last 2 months, as this crisis has been mounting, is the Prime Minister has been part of the time on holiday, and then part of the time taking it easy, and occasionally appearing at different places to show his face and to be the centre of attention. He went to Kiev for a photo opportunity, and he's given the odd speech saying about what a wonderful guy he is, and so on, what a wonderful government he led. And I mean, that people say he's going to come back. I can tell you absolutely for certain, I don't think there's any possibility whatsoever of him coming back, but totally irresponsible and dishonest man. And then we've got the government seems to have been asleep throughout the whole period. We hear very little from them. All we do hear about, or have been hearing about, are these two, Truss and Sunak, have been going around the country talking endlessly to a lot of old people who are mostly pretty well off, or almost all white, and probably aren't going to be here in a few years' time, trying to persuade them to vote for them by offering them more and more extreme right-wing policies. And so we've had this government that has, because of Johnson's example, and the rot always starts from the head and so on, as everybody says, the fish rots from the head. Because Johnson's been so dishonest, because he's known to be dishonest, because he doesn't have any moral standards. He doesn't have a moral compass, as the expression goes. We've seen such a decline in standards right from the top. He's a guy who's been happy to lie in Parliament time and time again. He's a guy who, whenever ministers have transgressed, think of Patel, think of Owen Paterson, think of that what's he called, Chris Pincher. He let them all off. In other words, anyone in Johnson's government has always known that whatever they do, they're going to get away with it because he's not going to do anything. And I think that sort of attitude right at the top from government, it kind of permeates down. So you get people like local governments, you get people like the police, and you get all sorts of big organisations think, well, if that's how the government behaves, then this is sort of the lead they're setting is one of just sort of do what you like, and if you got a problem, just lie about it, and so on. And so there's this huge degradation in standards in public life, I think, over the period of this government, which has been a big disadvantage. But the big thing that has affected our economy, which is why I think we're more likely to have an economic collapse, is Brexit, because Brexit has done just so much damage. If you look at the fact that small and medium-sized firms can no longer export to the biggest, richest trade market in the world. You look at the barriers to trade that we've set up. I mean, what firm is going to come to the UK and set up if they want to supply other countries, knowing that we're inside this fortress of red tape, knowing that every single export is going to be accompanied by all this endless paperwork? Nobody's going to come here. So inward investment is collapsing. Our exports to the EU are collapsing. And things are just going from bad to worse. We have the highest inflation for however many years it is, 40 years, I believe. It's forecast to go to up to 22% next year. And we're forecast to be the 19th slowest growing economy in the G20 next year. So as a result of Brexit, and of course the other thing is these massive labour shortages, because so many people from the EU went home after Brexit, and so many of those who would have come here, migrant workers who would have come here temporarily, are no longer coming because we make it virtually impossible. At the same time, the government's scrambling around in India and Philippines and Pakistan and Nigeria trying to find people to come and work in the health service. So all in all, Brexit has provided us with such a big disadvantage in a time of absolutely maximum crisis. And, the consequence of all this is that we're getting these strikes. Have you ever seen so many strikes? I mean, just about every union seems to be on strike or about to go on strike. This is all damaging the economy a great deal. And you look, even nurses are talking of going on strike. And when you look at the mess that the NHS is in because of this government policies, and you look at the things that we've talked about over the previous weeks, all the sewage in the seas and so on, you see this general decline in standards. Everything is just going to pot because we've had an absolutely useless, corrupt, dishonest government. And Truss's government is likely to be at least as bad, if not worse. And of course, you're going to get a lot of mental illness as a result of this. A lot of people are going to be stressed. You're going to get a lot of old people are going to die because of the cold. So much suffering is going to happen as a result of all this. And what's Truss going to do about it? Well, she's made it absolutely clear there are going to be no handouts. So if you're very poor and you're really desperate, you're not going to get any money. But she's going to bring in tax cuts so that if you're one of those rich people going to her hustings, if you're a Tory supporter or you're well off, then you are going to benefit from the tax cuts. If you're poor and starving and you don't know where your next meal's coming from, that's rather unfortunate. You must just go out and get a job perhaps, or get a couple of jobs and earn some money and then pay some tax, and she'll reduce the amount of tax you pay. And the other thing, of course, which is really, really the most significant point, I think, which I think is more likely than anything to lead to an economic collapse, is the cost of electricity. Truss has given no indication that she's going to help businesses on this. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. I'm sure that the people who will be manipulating her, people who will be telling her what to do. The right wing of the Tory party will not be very keen on giving any help to anybody. But we've all seen these firms on television night after night saying, look, here's my electricity bill. It used to be 10,000, it's now 120,000. Firms cannot cope with such big price increases. If you're running an office, your electricity bill is not going to be very important. It's only going to be a fairly relatively minor expense. You've got much bigger expenses like salary and rent and so on. If you're running a manufacturing business or you're running a restaurant, electricity is a big part of your expenses. And if post-pandemic you're just about making money, just about breaking even perhaps, and you've got all these problems with labour shortages, but you're struggling through, and suddenly your electricity bill goes up, another 100,000, 200,000 pounds, whatever it is, that's your profit wiped out. There's no point you carry on in business, and there's no future for your business. And so the likelihood is that thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses are going to say, we can't cope with this. We cannot cope with this sudden, enormous expense. And they'll close down. I mean, it's already happening. We know it's already happening. We've seen that businesses are closing down because they can't. They know they're not going to be able to pay their electricity bills. And when a business closes, it affects all those businesses who supply them. And so any business has got dozens and dozens and dozens of suppliers. There's the people who provide your insurance. There's the people who look after your van. There's the people who come and fix your computers, all the rest of it. All these businesses, when a firm closes, all these businesses, they lose a bit of business. And if enough businesses go bust or close down, they affect so many more businesses that also are likely to go down. And this is kind of a spiral. And so once you get this momentum going where businesses are closing and dragging down other businesses, it's a job to see quite where it ends. It's a really, really serious problem, and I don't think people are aware how serious it is. Not in that, of course, if you close a business, then whatever employees you've got, they'll try and find work elsewhere. But if they can't find work elsewhere, they'll be depending upon the government. And also, businesses that go bust, they stop paying tax. I mean, if they weren't paying any tax on their profits, but she's going to cut corporation tax, isn't she? So it'll make it better for firms that are making profits. But if firms are paying these huge electricity bills and have to close down, it doesn't matter if corporation tax is 0% or 100%. They can't survive. So that's I think the really big worry is that this will just lead to a complete collapse, and I have very, very little confidence that the government have any idea what to do about it. And from the social point of view, there are so many people already suffering. We've got this huge inflation. We've got prices going absolutely through the roof, food prices and so on. We're hearing even now, that a lot of food banks aren't able to supply enough food. They haven't got enough food. Well, as more and more people come to depend upon food banks, more and more people are going to get desperate. And I think when you've got a really desperate population, desperate people will resort to desperate means. And I think whereas we are, I think, a pretty relatively law-abiding society, we're not, we don't get excited about anything, and we tend to behave ourselves, and we don't resort to crime very often. Obviously certain sectors of the population do, but I think when people get really, really desperate and there's no alternative, and especially if you're a man or a young man, you've lost your job and you can't feed your children, and you're perhaps about to get evicted and so on, going out and nicking something is quite an easy way of solving your problem temporarily. It's what drug addicts do, don't they? We have a problem with a certain amount of petty crime from drug addicts who just need to feed their habit. Well, in this case, it'll not be a question of feeding their habit. It's a question of feeding. And what is also slightly worrying about all this is that once it starts, if people do start to resorting to crime, everybody knows that they're not going to get caught. The figures came out, I think, a week or so ago, showing that the police clear-up rate for burglaries, which is burglaries that result in someone being taken to court, was 3.5%. In other words, if you do decide that you can't afford to feed your children and you can't afford anything, and you decide to go out and break into somebody's house and nick their television and their computer and flog it down the pub for a few quid, you've got a 96.5% chance of never being caught. And I think once that were to start, if it were to start, I mean, that's going to scare everybody, and it's going to become a huge problem. That's what I talk about, a social collapse. I think it's something to bear in mind. Let's hope it never happens. Let's really hope it never happens. But we're at a situation where we've had a Prime Minister laughing at us for the last 3 years. We've had a government of utter incompetence, and have brought us Brexit. They got Brexit done, whereby we're all poorer, we're all suffering. And people have had enough. People have had enough. There's a great sense throughout the nation that people are really stressed and anxious. We all know something terrible is going to happen, but we don't know quite how bad it's going to be or quite when it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. It's not a situation where you can say, OK, we've got a crisis, we've got to get through this crisis, and by next Easter everything will be fine. We know it's not going to be. Economic damage, particularly when you're destroying companies, it takes a long time to repair that. You can't just rebuild it. You can't have a firm employing 40 people with 100 customers go bust and then say, somebody else will set up and replace them. It doesn't work that way. It takes a long time to build businesses, and as I said, Brexit has caused so much of this trouble, and to be in such a dire situation, for an economy to be in such a dire situation, and then to have taking over as Prime Minister some sort of dim-witted airhead, some woman who's been pushed around and pulled around and can't even make her mind up about anything. She's U-turning and flipping and flopping all over the place. Apparently she's going to appoint a very, very right-wing government, and they will just push her wherever they want to push her, and she'll go there. She'll not offer any resistance. This woman has no strength, no gravitas, no. She's got nothing really, and she's going to be our leader. This is a woman who's going to stand up to Putin. She's going to stand up to the EU. She's going to override the EU protocol and take us into a trade war with the EU, which provides 40% of our food. Yeah, bring it on. She's going to sort out the unions. She's going to legislate to stop them striking. Well, good luck with that. And yet at the same time, this miserable little woman, she's frightened to go on television and be interviewed by Nick Robinson or Andrew Neil, frightened of it. And she's going to stand up to Putin. And she's going to turbocharge our economy and unleash all our potential. It's dark times, and I'm really sorry to be so depressing about all this, but I really think you have to think ahead a bit, and it's going to be a really long, dark winter, and as I say, I don't think we're very far from complete collapse. So I'm completely wrong. On another note, I've never sought to make money out of my YouTube videos. We all get paid a share of the advertising revenue, but to be quite honest, when you take into account the time it takes to research and so on, the amount of money you get from YouTube is minimum wage. You're not going to make a fortune out of that. And I've never sought to, as I say, I've never asked people to send me money and so on. I've never really felt very comfortable about that. But I have from time to time thought that it might be nice to sell some merchandise. I'm a bit limited until I'm well aware that those of you who are kind enough to watch me are generally not young people. I don't think I've got many teenagers tuning in. So I haven't really had any idea about what I should sell. But a few months ago, someone got in touch with me and said, "Have you ever thought of doing a book?" So I thought, well, no. I mean, why would I do a book? So I replied saying, no, I've not time to write a book and so on. And he came right back to me and he said, no. He says, I don't mean writing a proper book. I said, why don't you do a book where you tell a history of Brexit, for example, and make it half cartoons and half text and so on, and explain it simply as to what's happened and so on. And I thought, what a good idea. So I did it, and I produced this little book, which I'm about to publish. I will be publishing it within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And, Well, I mean, if you're interested, I hope you might find it interesting. It's, as I say, it's just a bit of fun. It's a satirical look, and I've tried to be as satirical as possible about all the events over the last 3 or 4 years and where they've led us to. And so I just thought I'd let you know. I will give you more news either next week or the week after as to how you can get hold of a copy if you're interested. It will be available as a book or to download. So having said that, if you watched this far, thank you very much indeed. And until next time, bye for now.